Good morning. I need to unmask. Good morning. I'm actually getting accustomed to wearing a mask to the point where I forget that I have that on. But that is, I hope some of the rest of you have the opportunity also to be living your lives and saying, all right, we're living into this new normal as people that relate to each other. Especially as we go into a time where our schools are opening, keep that in mind of the different kinds of contacts that we have with people. This morning, I welcome you to something we started during this time of a new life and staying connected to each other, and that is both recording our worship services and presenting in a Facebook Live. And I will tell and let you know that there might be some changes to the schedule of that starting in September, what we will be doing is our Facebook Live and recorded service will be of our sanctuary service at 10:30. And we are continuing to work on the technology to make that as easy to hear and for you to be able to feel part of that service as possible. So this is one of our last two services that are live and recorded at 9:30 in our chapel. I want to say thank you again to Carol Moore, who's been with us from the beginning of this, and she's here doing our technology today. Reverend Lauren Clausen is also with us this morning as our liturgist, and Mike Snyder is going to be presenting our musical centering and prelude time this morning also. And so we've had many changes that have come even during this time. And thanks be to God that we get to gather in some way and somehow and are connected to each other in the ether and in the presence of the living God. So welcome to worship this morning. I invite you now to, I wanted to also say that our flowers today are from the Hughes family to the glory of God, and saying happy birthday to McKenna, who turned 17 this past week. And you may see her working at Kroger's sometime. So if you get a chance in the next week or so and see her, say happy birthday to McKenna. Let's go into our time of centering. I want you to breathe deeply wherever you are. Breathe in. Find yourself welcoming the light of Christ as we have lit these candles here on the altar today to remind us of the light of Christ. And center yourself in the presence of God as we listen to the prelude.
Good morning. Jan sends out our prayer concerns in the Tower Topics and in the e-Devos every week. And so we hope that you have been taking those and using those in your prayer time. Let us go to God in prayer now. Mighty and loving God, all your works proclaim the splendor of your name. From the platypus and the giraffe, the whale and the house wren, you who oversaw the Himalayas as they pushed up and the plains as they were laid out. For all the unique and amazing ways we have been knit together in body, mind, and spirit, we praise your name. In all of this wonder, Lord, sometimes we allow fear to overcome us. In all the reports of blame and offense, give us words of calm and reason, empathy and reassurance that you stand by us. When we hear of riots, we can be drawn into anger or disdain. Help us, Lord, to see things from the other's perspective, that we may understand our neighbors better. Forgive us our shortcomings and in the many ways that we fail to act out your love in the world. Because in the end, we have nothing to fear. Our present and our future is in you. We thank you, loving Lord, for our friends who see and accept us as we are and who speak truth into our life. We lift up to you our families on who we have leaned so closely during this time of confinement. They have put up with our quirks more than they have in the past. Heal our hurts, in case we have just endured any in our closeness. Give us words of comfort to our kids who have lost out on their traditions that they have so looked forward to, but give them a hope that they are going into a wonderful future in which you stand by them. May they have many blessings in this new year of school. For the church, may it realize the work you have for it does not stop because the buildings are temporarily closed. We know that you go out ahead of the church and you are working in the world. Lord, help us to see where these places are where we can join you in helping the least and the lost and those who are unloved. For our missionaries, Lord, increase their strength and perseverance as they serve in many, many ways here in the United States and also overseas. For those who worship in secret, may they never stop praying for your word to break forth into the light, and may one day they will be able to come out into the world and praise your name openly. Empower those who struggle with the unemployment, with health and safety decisions, with family strife. Be with those families who are separated from their spouses and loved ones in military deployment. For our health professionals who must separate themselves from their loved ones because of their jobs. Lord, we lift all of these up to you. All of these things, we know that you stand by us. And all of those that we have not been able to lift up because they are very tender on our hearts and our minds. We know that your Spirit intercedes for us when we cannot find the words to lift to you. Together, we do pray the words Jesus taught his disciples as they came before you in worship. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Today's reading comes from the book of Exodus, chapter 1 through chapter 2, verse 10. Now a new king came to power in Egypt who didn't know Joseph. He said to his people, "The Israelite people are now larger in number and stronger than we are. Come on, let's be smart and deal with them. Otherwise, they will only grow in number. And if war breaks out, they will join our enemies, fight against us, and then escape from the land." As a result, the Egyptians put foremen of forced work gangs over the Israelites to harass them with hard work. They had to build storage cities named Pithom and Ramses for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they grew and spread. So much so that the Egyptians started to look at the Israelites with disgust and dread. So the Egyptians enslaved the Israelites. They made their lives miserable with hard work, making mortar and bricks, doing field work, and by forcing them to do all kinds of other cruel work. The king of Egypt spoke to 2 Hebrew midwives named Shiphrah and Puah. "When you are helping the Hebrew women give birth and you see a baby being born, if it's a boy, kill him. But if it's a girl, you can let her live." Now the 2 midwives respected God, so they didn't obey the Egyptian king's orders. Instead, they let the baby boys live. So the king of Egypt called the 2 midwives and said to them, "Why are you doing this? Why are you letting the baby boys live?" The 2 midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because Hebrew women aren't like Egyptian women. They're much stronger and give birth before any midwives can get to them." So God treated the midwives well, and the people kept on multiplying and became very strong. But because the midwives respected God, God gave them households of their own. Then Pharaoh gave an order to all his people, "Throw every baby boy to the Hebrews into the Nile River, but you can let the girls live." Now, a man from Levi's household married a Levite woman. The woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw that the baby was healthy and beautiful, so she hid him for 3 months. When she couldn't hide him any longer, she took a reed basket and sealed it up with black tar. She put the child in the basket and set the basket among the reeds at the riverbank. The baby's older sister stood watch nearby to see what would happen to him. Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, while her women servants walked along beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent one of her servants to bring it to her. When she opened it, she saw the child. The boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. She said, "This must be one of the Hebrews' children." When the baby's sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Would you like me to go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter agreed. "Yes, do that." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I'll pay you for the work." So the woman took the child and nursed it. After the child had grown up, she brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her son. She named him Moses, because, she said, "I pulled him out of the water."
Our gospel text is from Matthew, chapter 16, beginning with verse 13. Now when Jesus came to the area of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the human one is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the other prophets." He said, "And what about you? Who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Then Jesus replied, "Happy are you, Simon, son of Jonah, because no human has shown this to you. Rather, my Father who is in heaven has shown you. I tell you that you are Peter, and I'll build my church on this rock. The gates of the underworld won't be able to stand against it. I'll give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Anything you fasten on earth will be fastened in heaven. Anything you loosen on earth will be loosened in heaven." Then he ordered the disciples not to tell anybody that he was the Christ. This is the word from the Lord. Thanks be to God. You know, when I went to Iceland as an exchange student in the mid-1970s, they were still really excited about the fact that they now had a highway that went all the way, continuously all the way around the island of Iceland, connecting all of the people together. They were excited because the very last stretch had been a difficult one, and it was along the southern coast of Iceland, across miles of black volcanic sand. And this was a tricky area because all the water from inland Iceland came down over the edge of the mountains and across these sands in varying channels and streams and rivers, and sometimes they were rushing and sometimes they were smaller. It was really difficult to build a highway on that kind of sand, especially because if you might know or heard of Iceland referred to as the land of fire and ice. In the interior of Iceland, there is glacial. And there's glaciers that come right up to the edge of those sands. And if there's some kind of geothermal or volcanic event under a glacier, you get even more glacial runoff across the sands. But by engineering and courage and hard work, they had created a foundation for the highway that ran across those sands, so that even when the floodwaters came, the highway could still stand against the forces of destruction, and allow the whole island to be connected by road, which they hadn't been for all of their history. Foundations are important. Foundations of bridges, of buildings, of families, of churches, of communities, and of nations. Today we begin the story of Exodus, that is in the book of Exodus, but also the story of the Exodus event in the life of God's people. And it is a story about God building the foundation of this people, of this covenant people, of this community and gathering of God's people, of the basic promise, I will be your God and you will be my people. And all the events of Exodus tell the story and give us an idea of the different stones that are part of that foundation, and how God reveals God's self to these people as the living God, the God of life. Up to now, God's been working just with one family, basically, the descendants of Abraham. And the promise that God has been working on at this point is, you're going to have many descendants. And that was pretty unlikely when he started off with Abraham and Sarah, who were old and past the time of having children and had nothing to give to their descendants if they had any. But God has been faithful to that promise so far. So that kind of was the first stone of the foundation. Now you're going to see kind of the next stones of the foundation. And the story is told, especially here with the birth of Moses, to show you the contrast between the foundation of the nation of Egypt and the different kind of foundation that will be for God's people. Egypt was a very wealthy nation, a powerful nation, a nation that where there were those who were tremendously wealthy and powerful, as in the king, the pharaoh, and all those kinds of nobles. Egypt had a security because when other nations and peoples around were struggling with famine and drought and things like that, Egypt never had to worry. They always had food security because they had the Nile River that flooded every year and brought not only water but rich soil for all their crops to grow. So they had all this. But what they did then was there was a working class that was at the foundation of their society that worked the fields, gathered these crops, did all of that kind of work, built storehouses for all the wealth. And in that class are the descendants of Abraham and his family. All these people were called the Hebrews in general. They weren't all Israelites, but they were all Hebrews, this poorer class. And the society was strong, but built on the backs of this group of people. This is not unusual, is it, in history? Throughout time and history in many nations and places, this is exactly what human beings have often done. Is as they've grown in power, somehow they've created a foundation of those who do the work and the poor, and those who do not actually get to participate in the wealth and the power of a nation. This is something we human beings do, and we should learn that is a broken foundation, a weak foundation. It will be broken by forces of destruction and death and washed away in some way, because you cannot survive as a people with that kind of foundation. We ourselves have a reckoning that in our nation, as we look at our own history and say, some of what's gone on in our nation has been just that has brought us some of what we thought of as comfort. Although we were saying our foundation was freedom and equality, it's been things like displacing and cruelly treating indigenous peoples, enslaving and using the labor of slaves, using wave after wave of immigrant populations to build cities and roads and bridges and railroads across this country. And we need to look and say, is that our foundation? Or is there a different way that we need to go back as the sands have shifted and we've realized that this is not a force for life? Are there different ways that we can build a foundation that is more like the foundations that God would have us build? And what you get in this story of the birth of Moses is the contrast between Egypt's foundation and what God is starting to build. As the Egyptian king has discovered, it's already making him uneasy that the people here in the Hebrew class are multiplying and growing. And he doesn't know that that's because God is the God of life making that happen. But he gets uneasy about that. And so he orders the foreman to make them work even harder. And when they still continue to grow, they give them the dirtiest, most dangerous, difficult jobs to break their backs if possible. And when that doesn't work, he says, then we will start killing them at birth. And ask the Hebrew midwives. They may not be Israelites, by the way. Shiphrah and Puah, who get named, which is very unusual for women to get named. But they may not be Israelites. They simply know the God of life, and they respect God and the life that God preserves. And they will not do this thing that the king has asked them to do, which is kill the boy babies. And they not only don't do it, they lie to the king afterwards about why it's not working out. That plan is not working out. So the second plan, again, about boy babies, is to have them all thrown into the river. Moses is born. His mother sees how healthy and beautiful he is. She sees the life that is in this child. And when she can no longer hide him, she follows the law. She puts him in the river, just happens to build an ark for him, a basket that is made waterproof that she puts him in. And his sister stands by and watches over him. You see God using these bad things again for life, to promote life, and with a preferential option for the poor, which we see throughout the biblical story. And when Pharaoh's daughter comes down to the river and finds this basket and opens it up, the child is crying. And here again is life working. She looks and says, this is one of the Hebrew children. But she also feels pity. Her heart is moved. She doesn't just see, well, this is one of these other people that are kind of non-people, the laborers. She sees a child. She sees a human being. This is always the way to build our foundation. To see other human beings with love and respect and dignity and care for them, which is what she does, unusually enough. So at this beginning part of the Exodus story, God is showing you this foundation of life and of each human life having a worth in it. Now turn to the gospel text, which is also about a foundation, and a foundation of life that recognizes life. What's important to you, there's a whole lot of meaning packed into the fact that this revelation of who Christ is, the question about who do people say that I am and who do you say that I am, is located in the city of Caesarea Philippi. Because you have to understand, the Caesarea Philippi is this beautiful city that was built and where many gods have been worshipped. Baal was worshipped there because it has this huge spring there. In lands, this semi-arid territory, wherever there was springs, there is life. So there's this spring there. Baal was worshipped there. Then it was considered the birthplace of Pan, and there was a shrine there for the god, the Greco-Roman god Pan. And the Romans used this as kind of vacation spot. And Herod the Great, hear me? Herod the Great has a connection because he's the one that really built up the city as it was in Jesus' time. Herod the Great was the one who was the king at the time Jesus was born, who had the Magi come and tell him there was another king come into the land. And what did he do? He killed the boy babies, the slaughter of the innocents in Bethlehem and around. It's meant to be a connection. You're meant to hear that echo and that connection of these other ways of building foundations of society set over and against God, who is the one foundation, the real way of living life. And so when Jesus says, who do people say that I am and who do you say that I am? And Simon, who's not yet Peter, Simon says, you are the Christ, Son of the living God, the one and only, the real God, the God of life. None of these other gods or powers are anything compared to the Christ, Son of the living God. And Jesus is one of those, happy are you, blessed are you. There's a blessing here because God has shown you this. This is what our God does, reveals God's self, God's life to us. God has shown you this, so you've gotten a piece of this. So you are a rock. And that's what the name Peter wasn't a name at the time. It just means rock. That's what it means. You are a rock, and I'm going to build my church on this rock. The word church is not used a lot in the Gospels or in the New Testament in general. It just means, actually, it was a word that was already in existence, meaning gathering or assembly. But Jesus is saying, I'm going to gather my people, my community, my assembly, and build it on this rock. And you're going to be like a foundation stone for this gathering of people. And you're going to be a teacher. That's what the keys of heaven mean. And you're going, whatever you say is the law that's going to work, that's what gets fastened into people's lives of how they live. And what you loose, what laws that you let go, because we're creating something new, those will be loosed also. And there's going to be a connection between heaven and earth and doing what God intends in this, the living God. And because of that, the gates of Hades, which is the underworld where all the dead are and all the bad things about death come out of, that's going to have no power over this life-giving God. Christ, Son of the living God. So we as people are formed on this foundation, those very foundations that we saw at the beginning of the Exodus story, and this foundation now that says, look around, and the things that happen in the world that are not of God are not our things to do either. We can work against them and work for life and work for the living God as God intends. And that means us today, right now, where we see building stones or foundational stones that need to be removed and replaced. We get to do that as one with the church, people of all ages, nations, and races that we are part of, in the name of Christ, Son of the living God. Amen. We always expect a response to the scriptures and the sermon, and many times in a worship service, that is the offering time. But I invite you to respond in some way in your life with action, but also in giving. I want to thank you. So many people that have been connected to us, not been able to come here to worship in person, who've continued to support the mission and ministry of this particular congregation and gathering of people, where we are trying also to work on this foundation. And remind you, there's lots and lots of ways to give, of your service and of your time and of your care for other people and of your offering. And thank you for all of you who have been mailing in offerings or have made the trip to drop off offerings in the drop box at the chapel door here at the church, or who have set up automated offering and giving of tithes and pledges and so on through the church. You know, my husband Chris and I, that's the way we give, because even though we're here at church every Sunday, with our crazy lives, it is still more dependable for us to have our tithe be set up as an automatic payment. And you can do that through Jan Talbot at the office. But thank you for the different ways that you give and offer yourselves to the mission and ministry of this particular gathering through your pledges and your gifts and your tithes and your offerings. God bless you. And I send you today with a blessing to keep your eyes open for the living God who promotes life, who picks out people. Keep your eyes open for those that you might look at and say, ah, here is a child of God. Thanks be to God. Amen.